Welcome back to Little Faith. This is a podcast sponsored by the Williamsburg Christadelphian Foundation. A Little Faith podcast explores both the challenges and hope of living a life of faith. This is our 5th special podcast covering faith during COVID-19. I'm Helen, and today I'm chatting with Jacob Pogson. Hi Jake, how are you doing?
Hi Helen, I'm alright.
So for many people listening to this podcast who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm 32. I'm from Australia. I grew up in country Australia, so about 6 hours northwest of Sydney, which is the major city on the east coast. So I grew up there on a little farm just out of a little town called Coonabarabran. So I was there with my 2 sisters and my family. We had some dogs and cows and a horse. And so I grew up there in a little town until I was 18. And then I moved to Sydney, Australia for university and was there for about 12 years. And right now I have been about a year in Baltimore in Maryland on the east coast of United States. And right now, I'm stuck here. The borders are closed, flights are very expensive, and, we're under a state of emergency to, not quite shelter in place, actually. Our governor hasn't gone that far, but it's basically isolation.
Yeah. And how many weeks have you been doing that for?
It's been about a month for me because I work at Johns Hopkins University in the School of Medicine, which is at the hospital. And so they basically about a month ago, they sent us home to work from home. That was a little bit before the governor instituted any isolation measures. So I've been working from home since for about, I think this is my 4th week.
Yeah, me too. We're coming towards the end of the 4th week, and it feels longer than that, actually. It feels longer than a month that we've been doing this, strangely.
Well, I think that means that you're getting used to it.
Yeah, I feel like I am. It's become the new normal.
Becoming
the new normal. So, Jacob, you are a vestibular neuroscientist and a clinical audiologist. So tell me what that means.
So a clinician scientist typically refers to a scientist with a professional degree and training in a clinical and scientific training. And so they engage in independent research. So that's usually people with, who are physicians with a PhD or nurses with a PhD, or in my case, an audiologist with a PhD. So as a scientist, you have to have deep knowledge, subject matter knowledge, knowing the literature and understanding the background of your field. You also you get training in critical thinking. You know how to read experiments and analyze the literature, the new ideas, and understand new data that comes out. And also be able to understand, do data analysis and do that rigorously and understand biases that come, like cognitive biases, and also statistical methods and techniques. Usually there's training in, what is the purpose of science, like the humanity part of science. It's not just logic and mathematics. Particularly in clinical science, as a physician scientist, the purpose of the science is to understand health and disease so that it's helping people. And that's where the audiology part comes in for me. So I have training and background in the ear, the auditory system, and the vestibular system, which is also in the ear, and the techniques that we use to measure and quantify their function, and relate those tests that we do to the physiology. So when people come in with hearing or balance problems, we're able to provide care for them and understand what the origin of some of their problems are. But it also means, as a clinician, that you have to have compassion and appreciating the often complex emotions of suffering, and particularly in my field, appreciating the importance of hearing and balance that it plays in our lives. they're two senses that we're not really conscious of until they go wrong.
And then we realize that like it's affecting everything. Like when we can't hear something, and then when we're feeling like dizzy or unbalanced and disoriented, like it's all consuming.
Yeah. So a hearing is a primary way that we connect to our loved ones, and so not having hearing or if you're not balanced, like if you keep falling over, you can't really do much else. So understanding the science and the clinical parts. I'm fascinated by problem solving and figuring out puzzles. So that's sort of how I ended up in that part.
And what brought you to Baltimore? How did you end up moving from Australia to the US and ending up in Baltimore?
So I first came to the United States in 2017 to present some work from my PhD at a scientific conference in Washington, D.C. And one of my mentors said to come up to visit Baltimore, to visit a professor at Johns Hopkins University. And I had no idea, where that was. So after spending the day with him, he invited me back to return for postdoctoral training. And at the time, I stayed with Bill and Carol Link and their family, who I'd never heard of before. Some Australian friends had suggested that I contact Hadassah Link on Facebook. So I ended up staying there for Thanksgiving, and that was it was a really special time. And I realized that I'd found a spiritual family in a foreign country, which was such a unique experience for me. So that really encouraged me to accept that offer. And so when I completed my PhD in 2018, I moved here in April 2019. So about a year ago. So I've been here for that long, and I actually really like it. I really like Baltimore. Its nickname is Charm City, which I've found to be true. It's actually got a really interesting background. So it was Maryland is one of the first states to be established in the nation. And so for a long time, Baltimore was like a booming industrial port with a lot of European immigration. But now it's struggling. It's a post-industrial city. And it could actually be the epitome of the best and the worst in the United States. So just a few blocks from me where I live is the Johns Hopkins University and the hospital. But, a few blocks away, there's muggings and people regularly die from gun shootings. There's chronic homelessness, drug addiction, terrible infrastructure. But there's a beautiful harbour, some pretty parks.
So Johns Hopkins, you're kind of at the centre of where everything's happening at the moment. You've obviously got the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Centre, and they're collecting all the data about coronavirus and from all over the world. And you also are really interested in data science, aren't you?
Yeah, so for my PhD, I decided to collect a lot of data, and very quickly I realised that I was going to get overwhelmed, and I couldn't use Excel to do that. So I had to teach myself, and I went to courses, learning data analysis and data science. And that was really, really helpful skill to have, actually, because you can apply it anywhere. It's not just to do with my field. You can use it to do anything. And that's something that Hopkins does, that sort of thing. I thought I came here, the leadership during the coronavirus here has been amazing, really exemplary. I thought I was coming here to learn about neuroscience and eye movements, but really I've learned a lot about public health, crisis leadership, emergency management, logistics. The School of Medicine, for example, where I am, they were preparing 2 or 3 months, like early December. No, not early December. It was late December. First, when the first cases were being picked up, they were already realizing what would happen, and so they responded really quickly.
That's fantastic.
Emergency management. The number of volunteers that have just stepped up to I guess there's all these medical students, there's postdocs like me. We can't do any research anymore, so there's over 1,000 volunteers helping up with the logistical support for all the frontline staff.
So tell us more about that. Tell us more about your volunteering you've been doing at Johns Hopkins, because you're obviously not continuing with your research at the moment. So, 1,000 people, that's really great that so many people have got involved at the hospital.
Yeah, so a lot of them, I think, were people, PhD students or medical students. And so we're now banned from going to the hospital. All research is shut down. All the clinics have stopped. So only urgent cases are being seen. Most of it's happening through telehealth. And all the hospitals are basically being cleared out to cope with the peak of the COVID-19 cases that are coming, and we're still on the upward slope. So that you just have this enormous amount of people who are really keen to help because their research has been shut down. I can't collect any more data. I'm still working from home, still have lots to do, but it's just an opportunity to help, to provide. It's really simple. The first couple of days, I was just packing bags and opening boxes full of plastic and little fanny packs for the staff to have, like little masks and gloves in. Another time, I was driving around boxes. They've started making these face masks, so they need to shuttle material around, and so I was doing some of that driving. I helped out with the mask fitting, so they have these N95 masks that has to seal around the face properly. And so my job there was to check that only eligible staff, because there's only limited resources, we had to check to make sure that only eligible staff were actually receiving the masks. So there's been a lot of volunteers. It's not just me. There's a lot of people who are really just stepped up to get involved. I think most people just want to be useful, to contribute. I guess most people are like me, where they're here for a specific purpose. So when that purpose is hindered, we're like, okay, what else can I do? And that's one opportunity.
And some of the equipment isn't just obviously for the hospital, but it's being moved around the country.
Yeah, so I'm also on a standby to do long distance driving. Yeah, so Hopkins has this enormous warehouse. It's kind of a hub, for this kind of thing. So they're sort of distributing things around as they're needed.
That's fantastic. And what kind of people have you met while you've been volunteering?
Most of them have been similar to me. So they're either doing a PhD, they've done a PhD, and they're here doing postdoctoral training, or actually many of them being medical students. So it's a big medical school here, and I think because they're no longer able to do their training, like their clinical training, they now have a lot more free time to be involved in volunteering.
And what's the atmosphere like, Jacob, and how are people feeling, like even amongst the volunteers?
It's kind of a sense of urgency but focus, and I really think that comes from the top. Like I was saying, the leadership from the president of the hospital, from the CEOs, really has been exemplary. We get emails every week, and they're really just saying, like, we're all doing this together. We have a plan. We need you to be involved. I think I'm just fortunate that I live quite nearby the hospital. And so, I live like 15-minute walk away. So I just walk up there and can help out.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so your first week on lockdown, you were just at home working from home. So like, how have you been personally?
So the first week, actually the first day, I was just working on the kitchen table, and within like 2 days or something, I quickly realized that, I spent the last year of my PhD working at home, mostly in isolation. So I just recalled all the things that, even though you're at home, it's really important to have. I found it really important to maintain a schedule, to actually get out of bed, get changed, to have a shower, have breakfast, keep a routine. That you're really boring practical stuff. I mean, it's not a holiday.
Yeah. And how does this feel different from doing your PhD?
It's just less pressure. It just feels like less pressure, to be honest. Like there's no deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a different kind of pressure from outside, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a different kind of pressure. It's like, why am I even doing this work? I'm learning about the mathematics of eye movements. It's so kind of minor in the scheme of things right now. So that's why I've been volunteering. I'm like, I spend my time studying calculus and eye movements and stuff, and then great, I can go and spend an afternoon driving around and contributing to the coronavirus effort. I think that's been important for me. That's part of why I quickly got on board with the volunteering.
And has that made you think about other bigger picture things, either in terms of your faith or how you feel personally, or even what are we all learn, like as a society, what are we all learning about ourselves and each other and our society? Like what will society look like after coronavirus, or what kind of things are we learning that are giving us clues about how we might need to change?
What I find exciting, I kind of go through cycles where I feel really positive and really like excited, like this is once in a lifetime event. What can I learn? What can I do? It's amazing living through this experience. So fascinating. So many things have changed that we never thought would change. So all that sort of disruption of expectations, it's just been really fascinating. But then there's other days where it's just like, I'm just happy just sitting in the sun and hearing some birds. And that's a nice day. So I think in crisis, we really are focused on what is important to us. It's something I'd never considered before, was safety and security. Wasn't until I came to the United States where it's common for there to be gun shootings and people to die from guns. Like that's just simply never really happened in Australia. So coming here shaking someone's hand or hugging them or something like that, that's going to be a really big shift in the way that we interact with it. It really already has changed how we interact with people. That's really been those kind of public health things, washing your hands, coughing in your elbow, all these sort of things. I mean, obviously something wasn't working, right? Something went wrong. Pandemics aren't normal. At least historically they are normal, actually. If anything, the last 100 years have been abnormal in that there really hasn't been a pandemic. So I think we're learning things that we've forgotten.
Yeah.
Quarantine.
And that we're not in control.
We're not in control, yeah.
And do these things make your faith do you feel more secure in your faith? Have you been reflecting on your relationship with God over the last few weeks?
Yeah, so it made me reflect back to about 10 years ago when when the last GFC happened, and where, my income was disrupted. And so that sort of sense of security, financial security, was disrupted. And so it really made me think about, okay, well, what do I want to do? What are my values? How can I change going forward? I realized that businesses have incomes and expenses and they have to balance each other out. And so there's just these sort of practical realities. And that was one of the reasons that I moved into academic environment, actually, was because was that there wasn't much opportunity at the time in business, but there was, academia just kept moving along. and education. Education's always important. And so that was something that wouldn't stop.
Yeah, something that was a constant. And in terms of your interest in audiology, you mentioned it earlier, talking about balance and listening and the idea of falling over. So I feel like there's like massive kind of spiritual analogies here with balance and listening. So I wondered whether you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, so remember the Hebrew Bible was or is from oral sources.
Yeah.
And most people in the day weren't literate, and so even when it was written down, it was written down from oral sources. And even then, like in Jesus's day, when it was written down, it was on these expensive scrolls, and they were only in the synagogues, and so they had to be memorized, and to be able to discuss them. Having a Bible in a book, like that's a relatively new invention. Let alone this app where I can search things and have footnotes and highlight things. So there's a lot about hearing and listening in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. For example, I really like the Shema in Deuteronomy. Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. It means, so the Shema means listen. And to listen by implication means to obey. If you're not obeying, you're not listening. So some of the spiritual things to do that, Jesus often spoke in parables. In Luke 8, he says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He often said that after his parables. In Matthew 13, he says, why do I speak to them in parables? Because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. So even though hearing, we might typically think about, it's our ear doing the hearing, but a lot of it has to do with our brain paying attention. What are we paying? We're always hearing lots of sound. If you go and sit outside and just listen to whatever, you're going to hear birds and aeroplanes, maybe lots of different sounds that if you're having a conversation with someone, you're completely ignoring all those other sounds because they're not important. You're not interested in those sounds. And so I think the spiritual perspective is that we are hearing and we are listening to what we want to, what we're deciding to pay attention to. We're filtering out the other sounds. Jesus would often go and pray in a desolate place. He would go away from all the other noises, and he would focus on his relationship that he had with his Father.
And the other important thing about listening is also looking, isn't it? Like when we're listening to someone, we actually look at them as well. I mean, obviously when we listen to someone on the phone, we can't see them. But
yeah, so talking face to face.
When someone isn't listening to us, we might say, look at me, look at me, I'm talking to you. And God does that a lot through scripture. He is asking his people, his audience, to look and to listen.
Mm-hmm.
So with you studying eye movements, how's that linked with the ear?
So our eyes are the most effective way to indicate attention. And so, where our eyes are looking is dominating our brain. That's where all the information from our eyes are coming into our brain. And so that's what is important to us. That's what we're attending to. But so where the ear comes into that is that there's a very quick reflex that comes from the ear. So in the ear, it's about the size of, the inner ear is about the size of a little pea. And there's 3 organs, 3 little canals, little semicircles that are sensitive to head rotations. And there's 2 in each ear that are sensitive to gravity. And they have a very, very quick reflex to our eye muscles, so that when we turn our head side to side, for example, the connection goes to the eye muscles, so that as our head goes to the right, our eye goes to the left. So even though our head, so like if we say yes or no, our eyes keep pointing ahead, like where we want to be looking at, even though our head's moving, our eye has to move as well.
To keep the balance.
To keep our vision steady.
Yeah.
Keep our vision steady. Yeah, so when people have balance problems, often it's because, or it can be because their vestibular system, their ear is having trouble, like the signal's not coming properly. And so when they walk around, for example, their vision is bouncing because that reflex isn't working properly. And so their balance is off because they can't see properly.
And can we apply that analogy to spiritually, that if we're not listening to God, if we're not looking, we are also unbalanced?
It kind of comes back to this term called homeostasis, which is a disruption of balance. So it's a very common word in biology, homeostasis. It's really what I'm studying. So I'm really here at Hopkins studying this idea of homeostasis as applied to the vestibular system. And we study that through eye movements because of that really quick connection between the ears and the eyes. What the eyes are doing, it tells us about what's happening with the ear function. And so it's this term that biology has this tendency to maintain steadiness or to maintain balance in the face of external perturbation or challenges. It tends to counterbalance that, like it pushes back, it responds to that. So for example, if we go outside in the cold, we shiver, so we, maintain our warmth, or if it becomes hot, we sweat, and so that cools us down. It's it's an interacting as cooperative system that tries to maintain a steady state. It's self-government. It's a governor. I think that's where the term governor comes from. We have this state governor. They're trying to keep the state in a steady state. like an engine throttle.
So it's like a physical form of self-control. Well, not just physical, but what I mean, when we talk about self-control, we're kind of thinking more like mental and
right.
How deciding, but it's like our body saying this is how you're going to control everything and keep it in balance.
Yeah, so if you think about a stressful event, like, something like doing a public talk, right? Or maybe going to a funeral where it's going to be an emotional event. There's no physiological threat there, but there's this emotional disturbance that is expressed physically. We get sweaty palms before we're going to talk. What threat is there? Like, we're not like we're hot. Or we cry at a funeral. There's this sort of interaction between our emotional state and our physiology. There's these feedback loops. And those feedback loops are really is what is at the heart of homeostasis, where the output of one system, the system is where the output feeds back into the input. So it influences itself. They always use the classical example of a cruise control in a car, of where you set, it's called a set point. You set the speed, and then when hills come along, then it increases the throttle to maintain that speed. That's what homeostasis comes from. So when you're talking about self-control, that's trying to modulate that. We have these feelings that may or may not be appropriate, and so we're adjusting those to what is helpful.
And spiritually, surely that's where we ask God to come into that too, begin a relationship with us. Like with the self, we know self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit, but we're made in His image, and He's calling us to have a relationship with Him, and we know that. Well, we're in a state of homeostasis at the moment, aren't we? In terms of there's a lot of stress and anxiety going on around us, and how are we all reacting to that?
Yeah, we're in a state of stress, so a challenge to that homeostasis. What was normal, things that were familiar are now disrupted, and it's really interesting because that's what Jesus did. He disrupted the normal things, people had expectations. They went, oh, well, the Messiah's coming, and are you the Messiah? He's the Messiah, yay. But then when he died, they're like, we didn't expect that to happen. On the road to Emmaus, they just said, like, we were expecting Israel to be restored, but it was different. And so I think the way that it relates to us right now is that, maybe we should reflect on what are our expectations. Where do we derive what is our set point? Where do we derive what's our goal? Where do we want to be? So when we're being challenged by this external perturbation, how do we find stability again? What is stability to us? And I think, certainly for me, it's the wisdom from Scripture. I really like the example of Psalm 1. So how blessed is the one who does not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the assembly of scoffers. Instead, he finds pleasure in obeying the Lord's commands. He meditates on his commands day and night. He's like a tree planted by flowing streams. It yields its fruit at the proper time, and its leaves never fall off. So it's an image of a healthy tree, and so the psalmist that saw this connection between meditating on the wisdom of God and being fruitful like a tree. And so there's something about meditation on this wisdom that provides homeostasis. It provides growth, fruitfulness, and it's like being planted by flowing streams.
And we're now in a state where we're being forced to stop, to pause, and this is a perfect time to meditate, surely, to reconnect with God, to be talking to Him, to be meditating on His Word, to be praying.
Yeah. So one of the things,
the pause button has been, pressed big time.
It's like a Sabbath, and the Sabbath. I mean, a Sabbath isn't a rest, right? On the seventh day, it says God rested, but it's not really a rest. It's just He rested from doing the other things. And so the Sabbath was to rest from our work and to do God's work. And so perhaps this might provide us with some time to reflect on how we might do that, how we might what might we change to enact that.
Yeah, and take time to listen. I mean, I feel like we're not having all this face-to-face at the moment with people in our lives, but there's time to spend just listening to God, listening to His Word, and listening to each other as well.
Yeah, one of the first things I did is I really have enjoyed getting back into podcasts. I feel like I have time to do that. And what I found it was really bad for me to get up in the morning and be like, oh, what's the latest bad news that's happening? It was a really terrible way to start the day. And so now I don't look at the news until lunchtime, and around breakfast, instead, I listen to a podcast. That's how I want to start my day. Things that are happening far away, I can't influence those things.
And we're usually so busy. Like, I think in our normal life, we're rushing and we're busy, and there's a lot of things going on. And we always say, well, I say, I don't know if you feel like this, but you're striving for some balance. You're always trying to juggle lots of things. And now we've really slowed down, and we've got time to contemplate what that really is. What is this balance? Like, what is this inner peace, stillness that we actually have been craving all along? And perhaps, part of what we all feel as humans is that we all crave that. We actually all crave some stillness.
Yeah. I really like the story of Elijah, where he was terrified and he fled into the wilderness, and yet God fed him on the way there. Like he went into the wilderness for 3 months, and God fed him, and he found something in there that he wasn't expecting. That God was there in a still, quiet voice that he wasn't listening. Or he had to go into the wilderness to hear it.
To push out all the noise. And maybe this is, lockdown might go on for 2 more months. So we might have 3 months of this. We don't know when it's going to end. And now's our opportunity to really listen and to listen up for the still small voice, for the little things, not just the big things.
Yeah, I agree. When there's so many big things that are out of our control, I think that's when the little things do become really nice. I have really enjoyed sitting on the back table listening to the birds. As spring migration is happening, so now I can have some time to listen to the birds. For some reason, the first week, one of the first things that happened was that I called home, I called my family, called several friends, my grandparents. I hadn't spoken to them in months, but suddenly everyone's just like connecting with each other. How are you going? And I think that was finding that sort of safety. I'm okay. Yep, you're okay. What's important is okay. And so what can we do? Now we have those sort of things, we're in a better state to cope with the disruption.
Yeah, like our bodies and minds and hearts are kind of realigned, rebalanced.
Yeah, I think I was surprised by that, about just how important safety and security is. That sort of psychological being safe. It was interesting because people, one of the first lessons from, actually, I think it was the first Sabbath. One of the first Sabbaths was in the wilderness. And when they got the manna. And so what some people did was they hoarded the food. They're like, quick, get all the food. And they hoarded it. And what happened? It went off. God said, you can't.
It went really moldy.
Don't hoard the food. You have to depend on me.
Yeah, on a daily basis.
Every
and just
day.
Living one day at a time.
Yeah, except for the Sabbath.
Yeah, and then it would last. And for all those back in Australia, they, of course, aren't quite experiencing the effects of coronavirus like the United States or like Europe or Asia yet, are they? So have you been talking to your friends and family back home about your experiences here? And do you think they're preparing themselves?
Yeah, so they're in a similar situation to us in terms of like the isolation. I don't know what it is, but they, in terms of the infection rates and the death rate, I don't know what they did, but I mean, they're already flattening their curve. They're on the downslope. New Zealand especially, yeah, it's amazing.
Wow.
It's amazing. I wonder if it's because it's like just been summer over there or something, but they're in a much better position than us. But they're in a similar position, like in terms of people staying at home. It's just with their number of infections.
Do you over the last 4 weeks, do you feel like your faith has been affected, like over the last 4 weeks personally?
Oh, my faith in God, not at all. But my faith in people, definitely. I think, to see the chaos, it's just amazing. It's amazing. So much chaos.
Yeah. And how quickly things can unravel.
Just how rapidly really important things change. And I'm not just talking about like stock markets and things like that. I'm like borders closing, suddenly being a citizen, where you are a citizen really matters. I feel really fortunate that I have sponsorship here. And so even though I'm a foreigner I'm an alien, a non-resident alien in the United States. But it still just makes me think like this is just an agreement between these countries. People have had trouble getting home.
Yeah, like so I've had a few messages from people in the UK saying, "Are you coming back?" As if like because they're hearing such awful things in the news about what's going on in the US. And I said, well, no, like what would happen even if I did come back to England? Where would I stay? Like what would we do? Like it's better just to stay where we are right now.
Yeah, I had those same conversations.
Yeah, it's interesting that that real desire to go home, because I know it happened during 9/11, like people calling families and calling, you know, their loved ones and saying, I want to come home, or people just stopped what they were doing and they tried to get home wherever they were. That real desire to go home, to go back to what you know, what's safe. And I think it's very much linked to what you've been talking about, Jacob, about safety, security, and then like that feeling of, you know, being balanced and being still. Like it's a desire to go back to God. I feel like there's everyone's kind of got that inside them.
Yeah.
To, you know, that searching, if that makes sense, you know, like feeling like that willingness, I've got to go somewhere, I've got to do something, I've got to feel like I'm in a secure place, in a secure relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that would, if anything, that would encourage people to reconsider their relationship with God and think about, you know, to go back to fundamentals of why do I believe what I believe? You know, I'm a young, healthy person. The coronavirus turns out does affect young people. So I've had to reflect on, okay, well, what would I do? I'm here in a different country. What help do I have here? Fortunately, I have good healthcare here. But, you know, I've had to think about, okay, what am I fearful? What are we fearing about? What are we fearful for? But we know that love drives out fear. And also with the death, with facing death, that's been interesting as well because, you know, you and I are baptized, right? And so we chose to experience a spiritual death and rebirth. And so why of all people should death be a foreign concept to us? Every week we remember the death of Christ. And in participating in those memorials, we remember that. In fact, you know, baptism is an expression of that possibility that death is required for us to be transformed, you know?
Yeah. But it also made me think that at the moment maybe we're in like this kind of there's almost a spirit of lockdown, that there is death even here, you know, like as in we're experiencing a type of death, like we are in I don't know, like a chrysalis or whatever. I don't know how to kind of develop the metaphor, but after coronavirus there's an element of rebirth,
right?
And renewal, physically, spiritually, socially, and with those opportunities. So we've got these opportunities to reflect on like how we're feeling now and like how we can grow and do better and like be born again in the future.
We are in metamorphosis.
Yeah, we are in metamorphosis now.
That's the exact word of Romans 12, right?
Yeah.
Be transformed.
Yeah.
And how are you transformed?
The renewing of your mind.
It's your mind.
Yeah. Romans 12 verse 2.
Yeah, do not be conformed to this present world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may test and approve what is the will of God, what is good and well-pleasing and perfect.
It's very appropriate for now.
It's very appropriate.
It's the time of coronavirus.
Yeah. Yeah, so what, you know, if that is our desire to be transformed, you know, then what is there that, you know, even Jesus overcame his panic attack in the Garden of Gethsemane because his relationship with his Father was stronger than anything else.
Yeah, it also kind of made me think that like there's been a lot of kind of blogs and social media posts and things about being productive. You know, this is a time to be productive, but actually this is a time to be transformed. Like not to be productive, like that just comes from the self. Like us deciding, oh, I've got this great to-do list and I'm gonna be really creative or whatever. But I think in our discussion we've come to the conclusion this is our opportunity to be transformed by God and to be transformed by Jesus, even in our current spiritual state, that there is something better.
Absolutely. I'm a very optimistic person. I think that's why, you know, even in a time of crisis, I get very excited that this is a great opportunity.
Well, it's a really good attitude to have.
I wanted to share, I found this article by an academic on coping with disasters. So she had done a lot of research in disaster zones like Syria. And so some of her advice was the first thing you have to do is to establish security and safety of you and your family. The second thing you need to do is to have a mental shift. So to remind yourself, I can adapt. I will adapt. I have adapted before to other circumstances. Sure, this is a big one. We haven't lived through a pandemic before, but, we have to embrace, we have that capability within us. And the third bit is to embrace that change. So allow ourselves to change the way we see the world. Denial that it's changed is going to just slow down that acceptance process, that for us to reimagine a different reality, a new reality. I was talking about before having a schedule, how some days I keep to my schedule, some days I can't or don't. Yeah, so working towards establishing serenity in the face of disaster. Calamity is a great teacher. And we know that crises strengthen faith. Whatever the outcome, we know Hebrews 11, Hebrews 12, Hebrews 10, whatever the outcome, that it's actually in those moments. That's the test. That's the test in the garden, right? What's your choice? You're going to have faith in God, or you're going to decide what's good and what's evil.
And that's where faith comes into it, because it's the unknown. We're in this state of things are very unknown of what the future holds. But the known that we do have is that we have a constant God who loves us. Right. And the constant is that he loved us so much that he gave us Jesus.
Right. Yeah, the Bible is the longest study. All the things that have ever happened are there. Plagues, pandemics, they're all there. There's nothing new under the sun. They all lived through it. They made choices in the face of uncertainty. I'm always fascinated by Abraham. God's like, get up from the city that you know and go somewhere you don't know. And if you do, I will bless you. And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. It's always fascinated me.
And you've moved to a different country, and so have I. I think, we've both learnt a lot about being transplanted from one country to the next, and we've learnt a lot about ourselves, as well as growing spiritually from that.
Yeah, I think it's made me have to reflect on what is the source of my stability. I guess both of us really have a good understanding now, a better understanding of what it means to be a stranger and a pilgrim. We're both foreigners here. Things are different culture, different ways of government. We're away from friends and family. And yet we found family.
Yeah.
We found spiritual family in a foreign country.
Yeah. And I think that really shows how much God loves us, that wherever we go, if we trust in him, he will provide what we need.
We can identify what we need.
Is there anything else you want to add or share?
Yeah, I guess I could relate this back to why I came here in the first place, which was to learn science. But as we've been talking about, it wasn't just science, it was a spiritual thing. The spiritual preceded, for me, the science. And so I'm studying this science because of how I feel like conceptually it relates to these spiritual ideas of growth, adaptation to challenges. And so what I've been fascinated by is, when you see patients, when people come in with these problems, is that capability to cope with challenges is in there, is in everyone. It's built into us. God has built it into us. But it's only, that capability is only revealed in these times of stress. And when other things go wrong, suddenly the other systems are revealed that, oh, there's other systems there that help us to cope. It's been interesting how within the normal operations of our society, it all depends on, the garbage trucks, the hospital cleaners, the nurses, the teachers, all these maintenance workers, which are often casual, low-paying jobs. Suddenly they're really valuable. Suddenly they're essential workers. And of course they were always essential because they were maintaining that, the homeostasis of society. And so when everything else stops, they have to keep going because they're the ones maintaining that function, that basic function. So that's fascinated me, how that in these times of challenges, we can learn so much about how the system is functioning. And it's always a lot more resilient than we think it is. Like you said about people after 9/11, humans are very pro-social. There's always some people who aren't, but most people are. Mostly we want to help others. And especially if that is something we think about and we meditate on. Like the Shema, love God with all your strength, love your neighbor as yourself, and even love your enemy.